Emily presses Meghan very gently on why she chose to just have this deal through Netflix rather than raising investment money on her own and thus potentially having even more control over her business.
Why not raise money on your own, where you might have more control, you might have more financial upside?
That had been my plan. And I thought that it would be great just to build out my own team and really do it purely on my terms.
Stalling.
But then I also would say Netflix made a really
rubbing
compelling
the nose
sell.
lie.
We began our relationship with Netflix 5 years ago, purely as a production company with Archwell Productions. And we've managed to have some wonderful shows and docuseries that we're really proud of. And then with the evolution of our partnership now is them doubling down in their support of As Ever.
Just days after this interview, Netflix announced that following its initial 5-year, $100 million deal with Harry and Meghan, they've signed a reportedly far less lucrative first look deal, similar to the Obamas.
When Emily first asks that question, when she's in the middle of asking it, you can see Meghan's face, like it goes full Blake Lively. Like the eyes go black and she doesn't blink and she's looking at her and she's sipping her beer out of a really nice frosted glass. And she's like got the beer almost coagulating in between her cheeks and she's letting her cheeks expand. And it's really like, are you fucking kidding me? You really gonna fucking go here? I'm a duchess. I'm supposed to be apolitical, even though she was reportedly calling every senator on Capitol Hill like 3 or 4 years ago, trying to get them to vote a certain way on a piece of legislation, to the point where these famous senators were saying to each other and their aides, reportedly, allegedly, how the fuck did Meghan Markle get my direct personal cell phone number? Emily tries again.
You're in a unique position. I saw you do an interview in 2016, and you had some choice words for President Trump.
I think it was in 2012, the Republican Party lost the female vote by 12 points. That's a huge number.
Mm-hmm. One of the few times I feel sorry for Mindy Kaling. That's the real Meghan. That's the Meghan whose mother was mysteriously not in her life for quite some time as a child, allegedly, reportedly. That part of Meghan's childhood is a mystery still. I believe the source of the narcissistic wound, whose father, in my opinion, attempted to make up for that maternal absence by giving Meghan everything she wanted. A child who clearly, I believe, was not the brightest, was not the most creative, was not the most talented, was not the kindest, did not have any real distinguishing factor, but created this monster whose vaulting ambitions finally got her the fame and the fortune she craved so deeply because she thought that would fill the black hole within. But there is no filling that black hole within because, as I suspect she knows, as I suspect, just my opinion, it doesn't make you guys look good to play this game. Okay, so stop. Just stop. Now, this brings us to one of Emily's last questions, which I promise. I mean, I think I prosecuted a pretty good case here. I love to play criminal prosecutor, and I think crimes are being committed against the culture. But I believe this final, it's either second to last or last, but it's going to prove my point. Okay, here we go.
If you could choose one thing for people to know the truth about you, what would that one thing be?
No one's ever.
Oh my God, have we not asked this a million times?
What a great question. The one thing. Oh gosh, what's the one thing? Oh gosh,
Oh my God. She's closing her eyes.
I think when I sit with it for a
Stammering,
second here, I just
looking
want
for
people
time,
to know that
stalling.
I'm a real person.
Yeah, we know
And
that.
I
You're a
think lot of
biological
that
human
gets
alive on
lost
planet
in
Earth at
what
this
can be
given
super
time.
dehumanizing when you look at the clickbait culture and how much is written about someone.
You mean all the shit you created? Your own shitstorm,
my
sister?
friends have to read those things.
This next little segment, this little chunk, this little nugget of gold struck a little close to home. And you know what? I liked it. I like it. I think, we here at Team Nerve think that Meghan might be probably none too subtly making reference to a skit that your newly minted actress over here did recently. Let's take a look.
How did that land for you?
I think I knew who I was trying to meet. And so if you know your audience, you know your demographic, well, they love the show. And my partners love the show, and that's why we have a season 2 and why we have more fun coming.
Heartbeat.
So I think oftentimes the negative voices, are they saying negative things and then secretly going home and making single skillet spaghetti? Possibly. And that's all right. They're trying to pay their bills, and that's for them to sort out if they're comfortable doing it at someone else's detriment.
Detriment? And she's asked if Emily says, Meghan, can you go out for a drink in your town, which is, filled with really wealthy, famous people who, excuse me, are not going to blink twice at these two, okay? They're not. And Meghan she's like, well, yeah, you hick. Of course we go out a lot. We go out all the time. And that she doesn't need to try to be incognito. And then she contradicts herself immediately, on brand as usual.
If you had total anonymity for a month, what would you do?
I would go grocery shopping every day.
Oh my God. So Meghan can go out on the town to the bookstore and the food truck and get her fancy latte and her smash burger and trail around with a camera crew, right? Because we want our privacy, but we're rolling around Montecito with a camera crew and a journalist, and we're doing, like, Emily's doing costume changes over here, okay? And, but Meghan can't go grocery shopping.
It was supposed to be just another glossy sit-down, another carefully choreographed interview designed to reinforce the brand of Meghan Markle, wellness queen, loving mom, misunderstood duchess turned business mogul. But within minutes of her conversation with Bloomberg's Chang, it became clear something was off. This wasn't the usual smooth, smiling Meghan. This was strained, defensive, evasive. The mask, once so perfectly affixed, was starting to crack. And for the first time in a long time, the world got a glimpse of the real person behind the persona. And not everyone liked what they saw. This wasn't just about jam or tea or one-pan pasta. It wasn't even about business, really. It was about control. Control of the narrative, control of the brand, control of every word and facial expression that could be memed, mocked, or monetized. But when that control began to slip, when Meghan was forced off script by questions she didn't like, reactions she couldn't hide, and facts she couldn't spin, the illusion started to collapse. And what emerged from beneath was uncomfortable. Not tragic, not triumphant, just revealing in all the wrong ways. Because this interview didn't just expose a few inconsistencies, it ripped open the carefully curated world Meghan has spent years trying to build. One where every criticism is cruelty, every parody is an attack, and every awkward truth can be polished into a press release. Except this time, there was no press release fast enough to clean up the fallout. The internet noticed. Her critics noticed. Even her defenders had to pause. Because when someone who claims to be authentic can't answer a basic question without blinking like a deer in headlights, people start asking deeper questions. And they weren't the only ones. From the parody skits that hit a little too close to home, to her refusal to share sales data for her own business, to the bizarre contradictions about privacy, politics, and pasta, this wasn't a train wreck. It was a slow, deliberate detachment from reality. And by the end of the interview, even Meghan's most media-savvy moments couldn't hide the fact that something was unraveling. But this wasn't just a bad press day. It wasn't just an awkward moment caught on tape. This was a warning shot to the empire she's tried so hard to build. Because when the image you sell is more carefully constructed than the product you're pitching, eventually people stop buying. And what came next would shake her brand to its core. It started as a joke, a parody skit called With Love, Meghan, with a Y, a playful jab at Meghan Markle's lifestyle brand, and her now infamous one skillet spaghetti segment. But for Meghan, it landed like a punch to the gut. In her Bloomberg interview, she couldn't resist referencing it. Not directly, not by name, but the contempt was unmistakable. Her tone, controlled venom, her words, drenched in superiority. People saying negative things and then going home and making single skillet spaghetti, she quipped. It was a subtle swipe with a blade hidden under a velvet glove, and it hit its target. But here's the twist. The people she was mocking, they were mocking her first, and the audience knew it. The skit wasn't just comedy, it was commentary. The costumes, the fake farmhouse setting, the choreographed kitchen moment, they all exaggerated Meghan's brand to the point of absurdity. But instead of brushing it off with grace or laughing along like a good sport, Meghan made it personal. She went on the defensive, hard, and in doing so, she confirmed exactly what the parody was trying to say, that her brand isn't built on authenticity, it's built on affectation. What made it worse was how transparent the bitterness became. The throwaway line about critics paying their bills at someone else's detriment wasn't just shade, it was a full-on storm. And the timing? Impeccable. Because just moments before, her own critics had revealed that her signature dish, the centerpiece of her cozy domestic image, wasn't even original. The one-pot pasta? allegedly lifted straight from a decades-old Martha Stewart recipe. So not only could she not take a joke, she couldn't take a hint. The brand she claimed was fun and relatable was starting to feel recycled and reactive. And still, she doubled down. She turned playful jabs into personal vendettas. Rather than say, hey, that was funny, maybe I'll join the next parody, Meghan drew a line in the sand, a silent war against anyone who dared poke fun at her curated image. But here's the real irony. If Meghan had leaned into the joke, if she'd shown even a flicker of self-awareness, she might have come off more human, more relatable, more real. But instead, she bristled, she recoiled, and she gave her critics exactly what they were waiting for. Proof that the brand wasn't built to laugh, only to sell. And that spaghetti, it wasn't just dinner. It was a symbol, a dish that could have been the simplest gateway into genuine connection. But in Meghan's world, even pasta has a press strategy. And as we'd soon see, this obsession with image didn't stop in the kitchen. It followed her straight into the boardroom and beyond. She smiled as she said it, that everything was selling out, that as ever, her new lifestyle brand was already a blazing success. It was the kind of claim that should have been a triumphant business headline. But when Bloomberg's Emily Chang asked the most basic question in entrepreneurship, how are the sales figures? Meghan Markle froze. There were no metrics, no revenue ranges, no SKU breakdowns, not even the illusion of real business data. Just another deflection, wrapped in PR gloss. It sold out too fast. We couldn't track the data. Wait, what? In a world where Shopify dashboards update by the second, where even Etsy shop owners know their top-selling item, the idea that Meghan's team somehow missed the analytics is laughable. And for a woman branding herself as an empowered founder and business visionary, the excuse was more than weak. It was suspicious. Because if your brand is winning, why hide the scoreboard? Instead of answers, viewers were handed carefully curated vagueness, smiling deflection, lifestyle buzzwords, and a vague anecdote about product demand. But no numbers, no scale, no proof. Even Emily, who had been lobbing Meghan softball after softball, couldn't fully mask her disbelief. She shifted. She clarified. She pressed again, more pointed this time. Why didn't Meghan raise her own capital instead of relying on corporate partners? Why give up control of your own empire if you really believe in your product? Meghan's response? More fog. That had been my plan, she said, before pivoting into a romanticized retelling of her partnership with Netflix. Suddenly, it wasn't about autonomy or financial upside. It was about support, about loyalty, about optics. It wasn't business, it was theater. And the audience could feel it. And then, just days after the interview aired, the curtain was yanked back. Netflix quietly announced that the couple's $100 million mega deal was no more. Instead of a renewal or expansion, they were handed a far less lucrative first-look deal. Translation: Netflix isn't buying what Meghan's selling, literally or figuratively. Even Bella Bajaria, Netflix's chief content officer, issued a brutally honest statement. The response to their work speaks for itself. In Hollywood speak, that's as close to a public execution as it gets. No sugarcoating, no spin, just cold corporate rejection. And that's when the branding cracks turned into full-on fissures. Because the Meghan who claimed she was too successful to measure suddenly looked like someone avoiding the truth. And the lifestyle brand she presented as authentic started feeling like a hall of mirrors. Everything exaggerated, nothing real. Her flour-dusted jams, overpriced. Her pastel teas, tasteless. Her sprinkles, allegedly slimy. And behind it all was a founder who refused to say just how many jars were even available to begin with. Was it 500, 50, 11? The truth is, Ever may never have been about the products at all. It was about perception. Meghan wasn't launching a business. She was launching a feeling, an aesthetic, a fantasy that you too could buy into her curated world of quiet luxury, vanilla turmeric marshmallows, and borrowed kitchens in borrowed farmhouses. Except when the fantasy gets questioned, when someone dares to ask about real numbers, everything falls apart. Because real entrepreneurs welcome the data, they need the feedback, they hunger for it. But Meghan? She dodged, she pivoted, she treated transparency like an insult. And in doing so, she exposed the fatal flaw in her entire public project. There's no there, no grounded business model, no scalable infrastructure, just a series of glossy launches that vanish as quickly as they arrive. And yet, she still insisted this was a success, that critics were simply detractors, that their opinions didn't matter. But when you build your brand on being relatable, real, and empowering, and then dismiss every tough question as a personal attack, that's not empowerment, that's spin. And spin can't carry a company, not for long. Because if the brand were real, the numbers would speak for themselves. But instead, what Meghan gave us was silence dressed up as success. And what followed pulled back the curtain even further. Meghan said it with a straight face, that Netflix was doubling down on their support of As Ever and her broader creative vision. In the Bloomberg interview, she spoke as though the streaming giant was practically throwing bouquets at her feet. And for a few brief moments, it almost sounded believable until you looked at the timeline. Because behind the scenes, Netflix wasn't doubling down. They were quietly stepping away. Just days after Meghan framed the partnership as stronger than ever, the headlines told a different story. The $100 million multi-year deal, once proudly flaunted by the Sussexes, was now over. In its place, a humble, far less lucrative first-look deal. A downgrade so glaring it couldn't be ignored. Not just in scale, but in symbolism. In Hollywood, a first-look arrangement is code for "we'll take your calls, but we're not committing to anything." It's a placeholder, a consolation prize, consolation. A way of saying, we're not out, but we're not in either. So why the mismatch? Why would Meghan claim growth while Netflix was clearly shrinking its involvement? The answer lies in a brutal Hollywood truth. Perception matters more than paper. Meghan needed the appearance of momentum, of corporate backing, of big-name belief. But Netflix, they needed results, ratings, ROI. And the hard truth is, Meghan and Harry's projects simply didn't deliver. It wasn't personal. It was a performance, and the performance had been underwhelming. Let's rewind. The Harry and Meghan docuseries, it made headlines, yes, but its long-term traction flatlined. These Spotify podcast archetypes canceled after one season. Critical reception ranged from lukewarm to mocking. Social media skewered it for being overly scripted, overly sanitized, and, ironically, lacking archetypes. And other Netflix pitches reportedly fizzled before they even left the development stage. One exec even called the pair content challenged. But the final blow came from Netflix's own chief content officer, Bella Baharia. Her words were few but devastating. The response to their work speaks for itself. In an industry known for sugarcoating failure, this was Hollywood's version of a middle finger. It was curt, cold, corporate, and utterly intentional. And yet, Meghan, ever the strategist, tried to preempt the narrative. She painted the transition not as a cutback, but as a celebration. That As Ever was a new chapter. That Netflix was still behind her. But here's the thing, Netflix isn't in the business of charity. If they believed As Ever was a cultural phenomenon, they'd be promoting it relentlessly. Instead, the series, if you can even call it that, was buried. No trailers, no billboards, no fanfare, no press push. Worse still, the whispers in the industry. Word spread fast that Meghan's Christmas special, a saccharine seasonal with love, Meghan installment, was being branded internally as camp. Not elegant, not elite, not cutting edge, just camp. That's Hollywood code for kitschy, off-brand, and tonally confused. Executives reportedly saw it as a novelty project, something that might briefly trend on social media before vanishing into the algorithm's abyss. And yet, the real kicker? The Meghan Markle brand had always been sold to us as elite, curated, Vogue-worthy, highbrow. So, to now be reduced, within 5 years, to maybe we'll throw you a holiday slot if there's room between Peppa Pig reruns and reruns of The Crown, that's not a pivot. That's a plunge. Still, Meghan's defenders rushed in. They blamed the media, the monarchy, misogyny, racism, America's short attention span, anything and everything except the work itself. But behind closed doors, even her most loyal supporters had to admit what was becoming painfully obvious. The Netflix glow-up had turned into a slow, polite ghosting. And the cost? It wasn't just financial, it was reputational. Because if Netflix, the platform that once paid 9 figures just to be in business with you, no longer sees the value in a multi-year commitment, the world starts asking uncomfortable questions. Questions like, was it all hype? Was the brand ever real? Or worse, have the Sussexes burned through their goodwill in record time? And Meghan's insistence that the deal was still strong. Netflix was still all in. It didn't read as confident. It read as desperate, as though she knew the walls were closing in, and hoped a few buzzwords and a polite smile would hold them off a little longer. But they didn't. Because in Hollywood, when the money dries up, the silence speaks louder than any press release. And Meghan's next move would reveal just how much ground she'd lost, and how far she'd go to pretend it never happened. It started as a simple question. Emily Chang asked Meghan if she and Harry ever went out into the town, out into Montecito, out among the people they claim to live so peacefully beside. The answer should have been a soft lob over the net, a charming anecdote, something human, maybe even relatable. Instead, Meghan's reply came off as smug. "We go out all the time," she said, voice steeped in condescension. "Of course we go out," she seemed to imply. "How dare you suggest otherwise?" But then, without skipping a beat, she contradicted herself entirely. Moments later, Emily asked what Meghan would do if granted full anonymity for a month. Meghan's answer? I'd go grocery shopping every day. Suddenly, the woman who just said she was a free, public Montecito butterfly was now presenting herself as a prisoner, unable to do even the most basic mundane task. Which is it? The invisible duchess who blends into farmers' markets with the locals? Or the hunted woman who can't grab a head of lettuce without being mobbed? That contradiction wasn't just awkward, it was revealing. Because Meghan's greatest struggle isn't fame or privacy, it's narrative control. She needs to be admired, but also persecuted. Empowered, yet misunderstood. Free to walk the streets, but simultaneously so famous that a trip to the grocery store is unthinkable. It's the paradox that fuels her entire public persona, the perpetual victim of a spotlight she chases. And nowhere is that paradox more obvious than in the presence of cameras, her cameras. Because while Meghan laments not being able to shop anonymously, she also conveniently forgets to mention the camera crew that shadowed her during this very interview. Footage shows her strolling through town, latte in hand, looking serene and composed, followed closely by cameras capturing every moment. A food truck visit, a boutique stop, a coffee break, not exactly the behavior of someone craving invisibility. And let's talk about that coffee. Social media eagle eyes quickly noticed the product placement in the interview, the carefully framed cups, the stylish bookstore, the manicured setting, even the outfit changes, yes, plural, by both Meghan and Emily during what was supposed to be a spontaneous day in the life. This wasn't raw or real. It was branded, scripted, controlled. And ironically, the one thing it couldn't control, it was how fake it looked. The optics were staggering. A woman preaching privacy while staging a choreographed media tour. A duchess who says she's misunderstood, while actively constructing an image more confusing than ever. Meghan can't go grocery shopping, but she can take a camera crew to a smash burger joint. She wants peace and quiet, but ends up on the cover of Bloomberg Businessweek with a full lifestyle editorial. This isn't a privacy problem. It's a strategy problem, a credibility problem. Even the visual language betrayed her. Every scene was softly lit, every frame curated for the Instagram generation. It was the kind of content designed to feel spontaneous, while being anything but. And the moment she uttered the phrase, "We go out all the time," it was like watching her try to balance on a house of cards made of talking points, because the next gust of truth took it all down. And here's where it cuts even deeper. Meghan isn't surrounded by paparazzi in Montecito. She's surrounded by celebrities. Big ones. Oprah, Ellen, Rob Lowe, Katy Perry. These are people who know how to disappear when they want to, who can grab a sandwich or hit a beach without staging a mini documentary. But Meghan? She stages every exit. Every moment becomes content. And then she wonders why the world doesn't buy her version of normal. And maybe, just maybe, if she didn't roll around town with a full production crew in tow, people would stop asking where the authenticity went. Because here's the truth. Grocery shopping isn't just about groceries. It's a symbol, a metaphor for real life, for blending in, for being grounded. And if Meghan truly wanted to blend in, she could. But blending in doesn't sell jam. It doesn't move tea. And it certainly doesn't get you a second season of With Love, Meghan. So instead, we get the curated coffee run, the sponsored smash burger moment, the faux candid trip to the food truck. It's all staged, all sterile, all calculated. And underneath it all is a woman who seems desperate to control how we see her, while insisting she doesn't care at all. But the next moment in the interview would prove that Meghan wasn't just struggling with public image, she was being haunted by her own past, and the questions she didn't want to answer. It was the moment that made even seasoned PR teams clench their jaws. Meghan was gliding through her Bloomberg interview, controlling the narrative with expert precision, until Emily Chang did something rare. She asked a real question. Not about jam, not about wellness, not about flour sprinkles or one-pot pasta, but about politics, about America, about where Meghan Markle, the self-declared voice of compassion and change, really stands in a time of national division. The question was soft, almost poetic. Emily even tried to preface it with a quote from Melinda French Gates, an effort to ease Meghan into the topic gently. She said, "I don't think the voices are gone. They're just quietly strategizing. What do you think of the direction our country is going in?" For a heartbeat, the interview froze. Meghan's face didn't flinch at first, but for those paying close attention, her eyes told another story. They went wide, black. Her expression flattened into a frozen, almost robotic stare. She was no longer in an interview. She was in a minefield, because this was the one thing her brand couldn't afford. A headline about Meghan Markle making political waves, again. And just like that, her performance slipped. She sipped her beer, slowly, too slow. Her cheeks expanded like she was holding it in her mouth, buying time, calculating. And then she began to speak, not from conviction, but from survival. She offered vague, rehearsed lines about humanity and values. No specifics, No opinions? Just the kind of foggy phrasing designed to dodge every trap. I just hope people are able to maintain the values they feel are important to them. To remember our humanity, she said, her voice suddenly thin. It sounded like a Hallmark card written by a committee, and it rang hollow, very hollow. But Emily wasn't finished. She pushed again, carefully but clearly. She brought up Meghan's 2016 interview, where she'd harshly criticized Donald Trump. Back then, Meghan had proudly declared him misogynistic and lamented how the Republican Party had lost the female vote by 12 points. It was bold, unapologetic, and politically charged. But now, she wanted distance, urgently. That was a different time, Meghan said. Certainly, she tried to laugh, to brush it off, but her tone betrayed her. It wasn't humor, it was damage control. Because she knew she couldn't afford to re-enter that battlefield. Not now. Not with a brand riding on vanilla neutrality, and especially not with Netflix still watching. But here's the twist. The moment she started to visibly spiral, help arrived. A waitress, seemingly out of nowhere, in the middle of the tension. A waitress approached the table. Coincidence? Hardly. Anyone watching closely could see it for what it was, a strategic rescue. A signal from Meghan's team, likely waved in behind the scenes, when the tone shifted from friendly lifestyle fluff to uncomfortable confrontation. The timing was surgical. The waitress appeared just as Meghan's body language stiffened, just as her verbal tap dance hit a wall, and Meghan, grateful, desperate, latched onto the interruption like a lifeline. "Oh, here comes the waitress," she exclaimed, almost too enthusiastically. Crisis averted, sort of. But what Meghan didn't realize, what her PR team likely did, is that the damage had already been done. The footage didn't lie. Her face, her panic, her shift in energy, it all told a bigger story that she wasn't in control, that she hadn't mastered the art of calm under pressure. That, after all these years in the spotlight, she still couldn't improvise without the safety net of scripted compassion and curated talking points. Because what she should have done was simple: acknowledge the past, then pivot with grace. Own the fact that she had spoken out before, and perhaps say that motherhood changed her lens, that she now focuses on connecting hearts, not dividing minds. Something, anything with substance and poise. Instead, what we got was deflection, a waitress, and then a face Meghan could barely hold together. She sped through her next sentence, rushed the smile, tried to land the dismount, but it was too late. The mask had slipped. The control was gone. And that's the real story here. Not what she said, but what she couldn't say, what she tried to hide. The scramble behind her eyes as the real Meghan, nervous, reactive, unpolished, peeked through the cracks of her carefully manufactured exterior. Because when you're truly grounded, you don't need a waitress to save you from your own opinions. You don't flinch at old interviews. You don't panic at soft political questions. You answer with calm, clarity, and maybe even courage. But Meghan? She blinked, hard. And in the next section of the interview, she wouldn't just blink. She'd insult the one person who had bent over backwards to make her look good. And the fallout from that would be impossible to walk back. By this point in the interview, the room felt different. The lighting hadn't changed. The location was the same. But Meghan Markle's energy had shifted, and so had the stakes. The tone was no longer cozy and curated. It was cautious, uneasy. And when Emily Chang pressed one final time on Meghan's past political comments, specifically her harsh criticism of Donald Trump in 2016, everything Meghan had tried so hard to suppress came bubbling to the surface. And this time, there was no waitress to save her. Back then, Meghan had called Trump divisive and misogynistic. She cited voter turnout data like a political commentator, speaking clearly and confidently. It was the kind of moment that earned her applause in liberal circles and headlines across the globe. But now, seated at a table meant for lifestyle branding and wellness PR, those old quotes had become liabilities. Because that was the old Meghan, actress, activist, citizen. Now, she was trying to be something else entirely. A global duchess, a maternal entrepreneur, a neutral symbol of compassion and wellness and jam. And political opinions, even ancient ones, don't fit into that persona. Especially not when you're trying to sell a Netflix-friendly, advertiser-safe image. So she did what she always does when things get uncomfortable. She deflected. "That was a different time," she repeated, her voice strained but coated in forced calm. Certainly, she added a tight laugh, one of those brittle mid-sentence chuckles that scream discomfort. "I was excited to be on that show. The Larry Wilmore show, I think." Her eyes darted for confirmation. Her mind is clearly stalling for time. It wasn't a dodge. It was a spiral. Because what followed wasn't conviction or clarity. It was panic dressed up as poise. She tried to reframe the moment as a youthful misstep. "I think if there's anything I wanted to say, I would say it now." A vague statement, non-committal, hollow. But behind the words was something more revealing. Meghan wasn't just trying to avoid controversy. She was actively running from her past, and her body betrayed her. She blinked rapidly. Her smile was tight, strained. Her voice picked up speed, like someone trying to outrun a rising tide. She attempted to pivot, rambling about how she chooses what matters to her now. How was that then? But the phrasing didn't land. Her transition was clumsy. Her affect was awkward. It was clear. She hadn't rehearsed this moment. She wasn't prepared to face it head-on. And her discomfort wasn't just visible, it was palpable. Then came the mask. That infamous Meghan mask, the practiced half-smile, the feigned serenity, snapped back into place. She tried to recenter, to wrap the moment in gentle platitudes, but viewers could see it. The tension in her jaw. There was a flicker of something darker behind her eyes. The real Meghan, the unfiltered one, was clawing her way out, and the only thing keeping her at bay was a script that was rapidly unraveling. Worse, she made a fatal misstep. She subtly insulted the interviewer. "Oh, you've got a lot of burning questions, don't you?" she said to Emily, with a faux laugh that dripped with condescension. It was meant to be playful. It came off dismissive, a passive-aggressive jab at a woman who had, up until that moment, done everything in her power to protect Meghan's image. It was Meghan's default mode, strike first, even when no one's attacking. And Emily, to her credit, she didn't flinch. She smiled, nodded, and let the silence do the work. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. If Meghan truly believed in her past comments, she'd have owned them. If she had evolved, she could have said so, gracefully. "I still believe in women's rights, but I've learned to navigate public discourse with more care." Or, "I've grown, I now focus on uniting, not dividing." Simple, elegant, honest. But Meghan didn't offer any of that. Instead, she distanced, deflected, and diminished the entire exchange. And this isn't just about Trump. It's about what happens when a brand built on authenticity starts to crumble under pressure. When someone who claims to speak truth to power suddenly can't even acknowledge what she once stood for. When the curated image can't withstand a mildly uncomfortable question. Because when you spend years telling the world you've found your voice, only to go silent the moment it matters, that's not empowerment. That's strategy. That's spin. And worst of all, it's transparent. What viewers saw wasn't confidence. It was a calculation. And Meghan's critics, those who have long accused her of being all image, no substance, felt vindicated. This was their smoking gun. A woman so committed to narrative control that even her past self had to be erased. And for those still on the fence, still wondering if maybe, Meghan was just misunderstood, this was the moment the doubt began to fade. Because when someone blinks that hard, that often, and that nervously in the face of their own words, you start to wonder what else they're hiding. And the very next segment would push that mask even closer to full collapse. It came near the end. One of those last-ditch questions meant to land softly, to tie things up with a bow, to let the subject leave on a human note. Emily Chang asked Meghan Markle what should have been a softball. If there's one thing you'd want people to know the truth about you, what would it be? And for a split second, everything stopped. The lights were still glowing, the camera still rolling, but Meghan's face changed. Her eyes darted, her breath caught, her voice stalled. This wasn't the cool, composed woman who smiled her way through brand pitches and pasta demos. This was someone grasping, desperately, for something to say. And what she landed on wasn't clear. It was a cliché. "I'm a real person," she said softly. "That's it, that's all. Not, I'm a businesswoman who works behind the scenes. Not, I'm a mother navigating fame. Not, I'm learning, growing, making mistakes." Just a vague, deflective reassurance that, despite the makeup, the lighting, the security detail, the curated quotes, she is in fact real. But here's the problem. People didn't need Meghan to confirm she was biologically alive. They needed her to reveal which version of herself was real. Because at this point, no one could tell anymore. Is she the driven entrepreneur who built her lifestyle brand from scratch? Or the figurehead who can't explain her own sales metrics? Is she the woman of the people who craves community and connection? Or the duchess who needs a camera crew to walk to a food truck? Is she the political advocate who once called out injustice with fire in her eyes? Or the brand ambassador who now dodges every question like it's radioactive? Because when Meghan closed her eyes, sighed, and whispered, "I'm a real person," what she actually revealed was that she no longer knows who that person is. And it showed. She didn't get emotional. She didn't share a story. She didn't connect. She performed. It was a rehearsed vulnerability, the kind that's supposed to pass as genuine without requiring any risk. The kind of line you memorize in case you're backed into a corner and need to escape with your dignity intact. But the audience didn't buy it. Because when someone's entire public brand is built on relatability, and they can't name one thing about themselves that feels remotely relatable, it lands with a thud. And then came the insult. As Meghan struggled to answer, she turned to Emily with a strange kind of smirk and said, "You've got a lot of burning questions, don't you?" It wasn't said with warmth. It wasn't playful. It was as if the very woman who had bent over backwards to give Meghan a glowing platform was now just another inconvenience to manage. Another ungrateful journalist who didn't know her place. But the real burn? Meghan wasn't just insulting Emily, she was insulting all of us. Because this question, about what she wished people knew about her, wasn't just Emily's, it was the world's. It was the last olive branch extended by an audience that wanted to believe there was more behind the PR machine. That somewhere beneath the glossy press kits and Netflix deals, there was still a girl who once ate at Jack in the Box and dreamed of making it big. But instead, we got this. A woman who has spent years manufacturing a real identity and now seems completely disconnected from it. She didn't say anything funny, or weird, or flawed. She didn't share a secret, a guilty pleasure, a cringe moment from childhood. She could have said, "I ugly cry at dog commercials," or "I once got rejected from a Trader Joe's sample booth." Something, anything. But instead, she offered the same carefully curated abstraction that has haunted her career from the start. Vague words in place of vulnerability, sound bites in place of substance. And if there was a real Meghan buried somewhere beneath all of this, that would have been the time to let her out. Instead, what we saw was a woman terrified of specificity. A woman who equates being real with being perceived as real, not actually being it. Because when she talked about the gossiping moms at school, it didn't sound like someone who wanted to connect. It sounded like someone still bitter about being excluded. When she said her kids would see those magazines, it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like a shield, a manipulation tactic to turn criticism into cruelty. But the cruelest twist? She never once turned the camera on herself. She never admitted fault, never cracked, never owned a misstep. She didn't say, "I misjudged the public," or "I've made mistakes in how I've handled fame." She didn't say, "I thought privacy meant hiding, but maybe it means showing who I really am." She gave nothing. And that's why this moment, meant to humanize her, felt so deeply inhuman. Because when you peel back all the layers and the polish and the posture, there's nothing underneath but brand strategy and canned sentiment. And if that's what Meghan calls real, then the next section would reveal just how deep the identity confusion truly runs. Starting with the name she still can't seem to get straight. By now, one thing had become unavoidably clear. Meghan Markle doesn't just struggle with identity, she performs it. And nowhere is that clearer than in the absurd, spiraling confusion over her own name. Markle? Sussex? Duchess of Sussex? Just Meghan? It's a game of ever-shifting titles, and every time she's asked about it, she seems less sure of the answer. During her Bloomberg interview, when asked what she had learned about herself since becoming Sussex, she paused. Hard. Not because the question was difficult, but because the premise itself was already tangled in contradictions. She didn't even flinch at being called Sussex, as if that were a natural thing to call a human being. She leaned into it, almost proudly, responding with the kind of preloaded pseudo-wisdom that's come to define her public appearances. What I learned about myself is, no matter what my name is, I'm still the same person. But here's the problem. She's not. Because the same person wouldn't correct Mindy Kaling on camera during a lighthearted conversation just because she referred to her as Meghan Markle. In Season 1, Part A of With Love, Mindy mentioned that Meghan used to eat Jack in the Box tacos as a kid. It was a charming, relatable moment. One that could have humanized Meghan more than any brand campaign ever could. But instead of embracing it, Meghan visibly recoiled. "You keep calling me Meghan Markle. You know I'm Sussex now. I'm Sussex now. Not Duchess of Sussex. Not just call me Meghan. Not even, I go by my married name now. No, just Sussex. Like a Bond villain trying to reinvent themselves after a press scandal." And that's not just strange, it's unsettling. Because what kind of person gets visibly uncomfortable being referred to by their own name? The name they used during her acting career. The name she built her brand on. The name on the Suits call sheets. The red carpet interviews. The activist speeches. To suddenly reject it, not with a chuckle, not with grace, but with icy correction, says everything. It's not about titles. It's about erasure. She doesn't want to be Meghan Markle anymore because that version of her, scrappy, ambitious, unroyal, is incompatible with the persona she's trying to sell now. But in doing so, she's not just rebranding. She's fragmenting, splintering into personas that are constantly in conflict. Meghan is a struggling actress. Meghan the activist. Meghan the duchess. Meghan the mother. Meghan the entrepreneur. Meghan is the victim. Meghan the brand. She plays each role depending on the platform. But none of them feel cohesive because each version exists to serve a purpose, to win an audience, to fend off criticism. And the only thing they all have in common, none of them seems truly rooted in a stable, authentic self. This isn't speculation. It's a pattern. Remember the Oprah interview? She referred to herself as just Meg. In court documents, she's the Duchess of Sussex. On Netflix, she swings between mom, Meghan, and co-founder. On Spotify, she introduced herself as Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, after insisting titles didn't matter. And now, in this Bloomberg piece, she's embracing Sussex like it's her maiden name. So, Who is she? That's not a rhetorical question, because even she doesn't seem to know anymore. And here's where things start to spiral into something darker: the narcissistic feedback loop. Every identity Meghan crafts is designed to earn admiration while shielding her from criticism. When one version is challenged, she pivots to another. Actress Meghan couldn't make it in Hollywood? Here comes Duchess Meghan. Royal Meghan gets criticized? Enter victim Meghan. That narrative gets old? Time to unveil entrepreneur Meghan, complete with slimy jam and curated kitchen shots. But none of it sticks. None of it lands. Because just when the public starts to settle into one version, Meghan rejects it, flips the script, and demands we accept the next iteration. No questions asked. And the irony? The more she tries to control the narrative, the more untrustworthy it becomes. Because a woman who truly knows herself isn't threatened by old names. She doesn't need to course correct every 18 months. She doesn't need to remind people she's a real person. She just is. But Meghan? She's constantly shedding identities like snakeskin, hoping that this next one will finally stick. Will finally make us love her the way she so clearly needs to be loved. And that's where the narcissistic spiral becomes tragic. Because when you build your self-worth entirely on external validation, you become addicted to reinvention. You become allergic to consistency. You lose the ability to just be and start obsessing over what you look like. That's why being called Meghan Markle stung. Because it dragged her back to a version of herself that wasn't royal or revered or branded. It reminded her, and us, of the truth. That behind all the titles and PR campaigns, she's still the same person she's trying so hard to outrun. And the next time she tries to rewrite the narrative, there may not be anyone left who is still buying the story. It began with jam, with pastel labels, soft lighting, and one skillet spaghetti. It was supposed to be a reintroduction. A warm, cozy lifestyle rollout of As Ever, the next phase of Meghan Markle's brand. But by the end of the Bloomberg interview, what had been intended as a soft focus redemption arc had collapsed into something far less flattering. A slow unraveling of image, identity, and intent. Because this wasn't just about a failed interview. It wasn't even about sales figures, or Netflix contracts, or whether Meghan can walk to a food truck without triggering a PR alert. It was about the one thing her brand has always promised, but never truly delivered: authenticity. And that's the irony that hangs over every moment of the conversation. Every blink, every smile, every perfectly timed interruption. Meghan is desperate to be seen as real, as misunderstood, as someone who has been wronged by the press, the palace, and the public. And yet, when given the opportunity to speak plainly, to connect, to reveal something human, she retreats behind polished phrases, vague generalities, and a face that only flickers with emotion when the mask begins to slip. She says she's a real person, but everything around her contradicts that. The choreographed food truck visit, the camera crews were shadowing her late run, the Instagram-perfect aesthetic of her casual moments. And when a journalist finally asks her to name the one truth she wishes people knew, she stumbles. Not because she doesn't have one, but because saying anything real might shatter the illusion she's worked so hard to build. It's not that Meghan Markle is fake, it's that she's over-curated, over-defended, over-strategized to the point that nothing lands as sincere anymore. Every answer feels like it's been prepped by a consultant, every gesture rehearsed in a mirror. And when public trust hinges on relatability, that kind of overproduction doesn't create connection. It breeds suspicion. Worse, Meghan doesn't seem to understand that. Or maybe she does, but simply can't stop. Because in her world, vulnerability is risk, and risk is dangerous. It opens the door to criticism, to memes, to parody skits that hit too close to home. So instead, she tries to control the narrative. Always. But the more tightly she grips it, the more obvious the cracks become. And here's the haunting part. You can see the toll it's taking. Her answers grow shorter. Her smile was more strained. Her posture is more rigid. By the end of the interview, Meghan doesn't look like a woman enjoying a successful relaunch. She looks like someone barely holding it together. Someone trying to manifest authenticity while constantly editing herself in real time. And that brings us to the final devastating truth. There is no there. It's a phrase that once haunted another woman with a troubled relationship to fame and reinvention, Marilyn Monroe. A woman whose persona became so performative, so disconnected from her reality, that the line between real and constructed eventually disappeared. Meghan, like Marilyn, has become a character trapped inside a brand. A woman so committed to projecting who she wants to be that she can no longer show who she actually is. And maybe that's the real tragedy here. Because if Meghan had simply answered with honesty, shared a quirk, a regret, a real imperfection, she might have disarmed her critics, connected with skeptics, and finally made the leap from polarizing royal to human being. Instead, she gave us a performance, a glossy, guarded, glitching performance. And it left us with the same question we've been asking for years now. Who is Meghan Markle, really? Not the Duchess, not the podcast host, not the jam seller, not the victim, not the brand, just Meghan. Because until that question is answered, not in press releases, not in interviews, but in actions, in truth, every relaunch will collapse under the weight of its own artifice. And to the audience, they won't wait forever. Because when the masks fall away and the cameras finally turn off and there's no assistant to wave over the waitress, what remains? A real person? Or just marketing?